Hey there! I recently released the demo for my game Dreadwinter on Steam, which you can play for free now. In this devlog, I'll go over what I've done in the 3 months since the last one, and review how the whole process has been. I'm going to work backwards for a bit, as there is one thing I'd like to talk about first. While I did achieve my main goal, which was getting Dreadwinter to a point where there's a playable demo, I did end up pulling out of the February Steam Next Fest. There's several reasons for this, but the main one is that I burned myself out and needed a break. I've been developing Dreadwinter for nearly a year and a half, and I'd say that about 60% of what's been done was developed over the course of a year, while the other 40% was done in the last 3 months. I think 3 months was too short a timeline to give myself to bring the demo to completion, as it was assuming that nothing would go wrong, which was a bold assumption to make. For the last month, I was working on Dreadwinter for about 10 hours each day. I managed to get the demo reviewed and ready to release about a week before the deadline. Getting a game or demo approved on Steam just means that the game launches correctly, and doesn't mean that the game is bug-free or complete. So I still had a bunch of small things to add and fixes to bugs that showed up in the following week. Once I hit the release button, it felt like 3 months of fatigue caught up with me, and I just didn't have the energy to keep going. This leads into my second reason, which is that the demo still needs a bit of work before I'm completely happy with it. But I didn't have the energy to keep working on it at the time. I feel like the demo at its current stage is more like an open beta rather than a representation of the full game, which is where it should be at if I wanted to show it off. There were a lot of things that I had to compromise on or cut out altogether in order to get the demo out in time. For example, magic is currently not available in the demo. While the actual game mechanics are implemented and there are usable magic spells, there isn't any sound for them and it's horribly unbalanced, so I don't think it's ready to be added into the game at this point. With the time I had, I couldn't afford to spend time perfecting the things I worked on, and had to make a lot of snap decisions. Let's take the game sound as an example. It was one of the last things I worked on, and somehow I managed to add it all in within a week, starting from getting audio to work in the game, all the way to producing the sounds. There's a mix of free assets I found online, and some I produced myself. The UI is a good place to look at as an example, as all of the sounds are self-produced, and there's a mix of sounds that I recorded, and some that I created digitally. I used Chiptone, which is a free synth tool, to produce a lot of the sounds, and then Audacity to edit and mix the result. I recorded things like grinding coffee beans and the sound of the coffee dripping, but I don't have the setup to record birdsong or opening doors, so I had to find those online. I wanted to use more natural sounds in the game, but when I was looking for sound assets online, I found it hard to find ones that sounded right, and so I chose to make some of it myself. You'll notice that the spells that the Rat King mini-boss uses all have synthesized sounds, but I'm not sure if that's the direction I want the magic sounds to go in, but I had to make the decision quickly and go with it, though I think I may end up redoing some of the sound in the end. I think this was the hardest part of the development process, since it's the area I had the least experience in, and by choosing to do it last, I ended up having to learn and produce at the same time, and it felt like I couldn't afford to make any mistakes, which became a bit overwhelming. I do feel like I was putting too much pressure on myself to create a perfect product, and playing through the demo, I am happy with what I've done. There are still bugs to fix, of course, and there's more I want to show off, but I think it's important for myself to recognise that this is still a work in progress, and a lot of the goals I set for myself are quite arbitrary. Like, there's no game over if I don't get something done in time, and it's not like I'm being graded on it, so it doesn't need to be perfect from the start. When I started working on Dreadwinter, one of the main themes I wanted to present was that it was okay to take your time, and that trying to make it big was not the only goal in life, which was the mindset that I had. I feel like the pressure I put on myself to try and make something out of this game caused me to lose that perspective, and I feel like I stopped enjoying working on it at some point. Going forwards, my aim is to not worry about success and to focus on enjoying the process. That was a bit of a tangent, but it's something I wanted to get off my chest. With that being said, let's get back into how I made Dreadwinter playable. Going back to where I was at the end of the last devlog, I'd just finished the Sun-Drowned Abyss and moved on to fleshing out the rest of the cafe gameplay. I started with adding customization to Dreadwinter since I thought it would take the most work. I wanted to divide the area up into tiles and have each piece of furniture be placed into those tiles, which would make decoration more organised. There's already a tile map in place that I used for navigation purposes, so it made sense to make use of it for placing furniture as well. Before that, I added a bell to the cafe, which when interacted with, allows you to open and close for business. Originally, Dreadwinter would automatically open and close for business at certain times, but I think giving the player control over when they open would lead to a better experience, as you wouldn't feel like you had to be there. I then added a decoration mode that you could enter, which would allow you to add and remove furniture. I had to rework the furniture components so that they would snap to the centre of a tile and block off tiles that they were in to prevent overlap. I also had to rework the machines, such as the coffee grinder, to also do the same thing. There was a bit of extra work involved to separate where you could place machines and furniture, since it wouldn't make much sense to be able to place your coffee grinder on the floor. In order to add and remove furniture, I then needed to add an inventory system specifically for it. One thing I forgot about was where the player could actually buy furniture, as none of the businesses I added to the town were designed for it. It's not as simple as just adding it to my list of items in the game, as some of them are built differently. For example, ingredients and weapons make use of separate classes, so having them in the same shop menu is more work than is needed. It's not impossible, but it's easier to just create another store for it. In the meantime, I gave the player a preset inventory to mess about with, and moving forward, I planned to add a carpenter's or furniture store. The next goal was to have Dreadwinter support you while you worked. The main challenge was trying to find a balance where they would help out but not do too much and end up automating everything. I first had to figure out some rules that they would follow. Some of these are that they would only help if there were more than one customer waiting and they could only brew coffee. The aim is for them to be useful in the early game where you generally wouldn't be able to handle more than one customer at a time. Most of the work went into tweaking the timings in order to achieve this goal and dealing with edge cases, such as if the player were to deliver a customer's order before winter did. I also ended up solving a problem which I was struggling with for a while, which was dealing with furniture blocking entrances, as it would cause issues with navigation. Initially, I thought I would either have to prevent the player from being able to block off certain points, which I don't think can really be done, or have the game be able to deal with these cases where there is no available path to a given point, which would also be a lot of work. The solution turned out to be somewhat trivial, as you can adjust the weight or cost of travelling from one tile to another. Let's say that moving from a tile to the neighbouring one costs 1 energy. We can make it so that moving through a tile that is occupied by furniture costs 1000 energy. The goal of a pathfinding algorithm is to get to the destination using the path with the lowest cost, so it will try to go around the furniture. If there is no other option, it will go through the furniture, which looks a bit odd, but is better than the game crashing. I feel like this was a bit of an obvious solution, but it's easy to end up tunneling in on something irrelevant. The last thing to do for the cafe was to finish the mixing minigame. The idea behind it is to put your coffee into a cauldron and then add in ingredients to adjust the taste of the drink, and if you have access to the recipe, you could also create a different drink altogether. This would add more depth to the gameplay, as customers would be able to order things other than coffee, and it also meant that they could now ask for a drink with a specific taste. I also wanted to add a minigame for making espresso drinks, but the mixing minigame took longer than expected, so that's something I'll aim to add in the future. At this point, I'd reached the bare minimum of what I wanted to have in the demo in terms of content, so it was time to work on some of the less exciting but necessary things, such as the menus and player progression. Some of the highlights included the inventory and equipment page, adding upgrades to the skill trees, and the relationship and character pages. The end result was pretty good, but the process is quite repetitive, in that a lot of it is just designing and coding buttons and other UI elements. I then implemented the skill experience systems, which would give the player skill points and upgrades as they played. Each skill tree has its own point system and method of gaining points, such as brewing coffee and defeating enemies. The management tree was a little more tricky, as the experience points gained depended on 2 things. I talked before about the cafe's development being based on interest, which increased the amount of customers you would get, and loyalty, which affected how long they would wait for, and the amount that they can tip. There's a skill you can unlock that freezes the amount of interest you have, which means that customers will always arrive at the same rate. This is useful if you want a more relaxed playstyle, as it can be unlocked very early on. This adds a bit of a challenge though, as I need to make sure that this playstyle is as viable as one that focuses on serving as many customers as possible. My vision is that it would be hard to increase both interest and loyalty, as loyalty is gained by serving quality drinks, which can't really be done if you're trying to do things as fast as possible. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way for the player to gain skill points at the same rate, regardless of whether they are focusing on speed or quality, so that neither playstyle is more optimal. I'm not sure if the way I've done things completely works that way, but that's what I'm aiming for. Alongside that, I added the quest system into the game and made the player customizable. Now that this was done, I could finally work on the character creation menu, as well as revamping the main menu, which is previously only used for testing. This took me to around the start of the new year, so I had a few weeks to add as much of the additional content I wanted to add, work on the sound and music, and then clean up the demo for release. I worked on adding cutscenes into the game, which first involved figuring out how to get a system working for it. It doesn't seem like there's a universal technique for this, so I cobbled something together. A lot of the challenge here was keeping everything organised, as there are several ways to progress a cutscene, such as a dialogue ending or an animation finishing, and you need to be able to keep track of what points the cutscene is at. There's about 7 cutscene events in the demo, which mostly consists of heart events and character intros. You need characters for these events though, so I then had to design the remaining characters that were going to be in the demo. This is something I was looking forward to, since I've had a lot of characters in mind for a while. I also took some time to write random dialogue for each character to add a bit of personality to them. I wanted to add character schedules as well, so they wouldn't stay in the same place all day, but I'm still figuring out how this will be implemented. Dreadwinter do have a basic schedule in the cafe, in that they arrive and leave at certain times, so I do have a foundation to work on, but there's some other technical details that need to be worked out as well. One thing I've been meaning to do is to play some similar games to figure out how they do these sorts of things. I then added the interiors for the necessary buildings, such as the blacksmiths and the clinic. Blunder Muffin was an exception, since it was something I wanted to work on and was fun. I added a lot of references to the things I like, so I enjoyed working on it. I designed the player's room a while ago, but finally got round to adding it into the game, and also designed the balcony area. Designing rooms and buildings always takes longer than you expect, since after you've drawn everything out, you need to convert it all into separate assets, and also add collision boxes to them before placing it in the level. I also added an evening and night mode into the game, which I think adds a nice vibe. I wanted to add music into the overworld as well, but making the 30-second loop for the cafe gameplay took almost an entire day, so I think I need to work on my composing skills first. The final week was spent cleaning up the demo and submitting it for release. This was a lot more stressful than it should have been, as the first build I submitted didn't actually launch, as I was testing my build using the existing settings file, but on a fresh install, the file generated was incorrect. It was a pretty quick fix, and it passed the review in the end, but it was a stressful few days of waiting. As far as I'm aware, Steam will review whichever build is set as the live one, so you can update your build and they will review the most recent one, in case you do anything silly like me. So in the end, I did make the deadline, but by the time I hit the release button, I didn't have the energy to do any more than that. I think that 3 months was definitely too short a time to do all of this in, and 6 months would likely have been better. I've taken a week off to relax, and I'm starting to slowly get back into things. From the feedback I've gotten, there are some important bugs that do need to be fixed. The main ones I'm looking for are things that cause the game to crash or soft lock. After that, there's a lot of things I can work on, but I think I'll start with designing the rest of the buildings and characters, and then maybe look to expand the map a bit more. One important thing I have neglected is the marketing side of the game, which was also one of the reasons I pulled out of the next fest. By pulling out of this one, I'm still eligible to participate in future Next Fests, so in the meantime I'll put some effort into promoting Dreadwinter. As a start, I've opened a Discord server so you can get more frequent updates, and I'll try to be active on other social media as well. It's not something I have a lot of experience in, so I'm thinking about trying to get a publishing deal as well. That's about it for this devlog. Please wishlist Dreadwinter on Steam if you haven't already, and give the demo a try. Thanks for watching.